Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me, I have a newcomer into the temple, though his work is certainly not a newcomer to the place. Coming to us from the wonderful world across the ponds, and the creator of This World Summons Too Many Heroes, which is currently crowdfunding its definitive edition, the one and only Mr. Duffo himself, Nick Duff. How you doing today, man?
Yes, I'm doing excellent. Thank you very much for having me. It is very wet and drizzly outside. We narrowly avoided a cyclone here in Australia, which is nice. But we did not avoid a lot of rain and some very big puddles. Houses are actually evacuated 2 streets away from me. That's kind of how rough it got here. But I'm very happy to have power and to be safe and dry in my house and to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm smack dab in Tornado Alley over here, so I know the feeling. Plus, I've joked for years that Mother Nature is on the drugs.
Yeah, sure is.
Now, as far as which drugs, the answer to that question is yes. Yes, even that one that you haven't thought of yet. And that one that you've only seen in a book. And that one that doesn't even exist yet. She's hanging out with Hunter S. Thompson, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course.
But one of the traditions around here is opening with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So with that in mind, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Yeah, of course. I first played tabletop games in university. Started hanging around with a friend group where one of the members there, his dad was like a long-time D&D fan, like had been playing it for 30 years, largely with the same group, which is a wild achievement in itself. And so he introduced that to us, sat us down at the table. Only found out several weeks later that what we were playing wasn't D&D, it was Pathfinder, which is always a fun bait and switch.
Yeah, it's a twist that Shyamalan would approve of.
So yeah, started with Pathfinder, played D&D for ages, and after a few years of this, we ended up with this other older friend in our group who was very into World of Darkness games, particularly New World of Darkness. So we played Vampire the Requiem and Mage the Ascension, I believe it is, as our first games stepping.
New World would be Mage the Awakening.
Mage the Awakening, my apologies, that was it. Those were our introductions to non-D&D tabletop games. And after that, we started exploring that, I wonder if there are any of these out there that don't have the most insane magic systems in the world.
Yeah, we've had the running joke about how Mage is a perfectly balanced game with no exploits whatsoever.
Yeah.
I cannot say that with a straight face because we know the truth of the matter. Like somebody who knows mildly what they're doing can completely break it.
Yeah, it lends itself to that. I think that's part of what's advertised on the box, is that this magic system is very world-breaking. And as a GM, you've just got to learn to handle that and place challenges that are more social than power-based. But of course, you've got a bunch of magic abilities that do press into that world as well, so that also makes things harder.
Yeah, and I've seen some people go, we need to have ways to challenge the player. They're too powerful, and I'm like, you're not going to really have that problem if you give support for high powered play and advise people on ways to do it. I think I don't know when this happened, but there's this narrative that high power or power fantasy is something to be shunned, and I do not get it. Because at the end of the day, we are playing power fantasy.
as you may have guessed from my design, yeah, I also don't share that belief.
Oh yeah, and now this world summons too many heroes, which I'm just gonna call too many heroes for the sake of my sanity, and I'm not paid by the syllable. Is a Lumen powered game. So the natural question leading into that is, how did you first discover the Lumen engine?
I've always been interested in mechanics engines. All of my design has actually been mechanics first. Whenever I create a game, I tend to go around, look at what mechanic designs are floating around. There was a period where SRDs were quite popular, system rules documents, where people were like, here's a bunch of, like, here's some dice and how to use these dice. I think it will do this kind of thing. I would like for other people to explore that.
Mm-hmm.
And Lumen, like, that was very much one of the core pitches of Lumen. Like, it was built for like a specific game, Light, which is the Gila RPG's game, which was very themed around Destiny and trying to create a Destiny type experience, Destiny the video game. It kind of spiked in popularity a bit, and I remember going through reading the rules document and immediately tying it in my head to an idea that I had been tossing back and forth with a friend for a while. I've got a friend of mine who's been in my regular tabletop groups for a long time, who's very into isekai stuff, was into it long before I did, and he'd always said that wanting to make a game like this was a project that he wanted to take up at some point. And I found this system, and I brought it to him like a dead bird and said, "Hey, here we go.
Yeah,
this is it." And he kind of looked at it, but I was the one at that point who started having a crack at it myself and reading a bunch of isekai manga. At that time, I only really knew the big popular shows and examples of it.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't gone down the rabbit hole yet, but as I started reading like a lot more manga and just like punching through all kinds of the fairly obscure long title ones, they kind of sit in the reservoir of the Japanese creation. I ended up getting really into them and felt like I needed to pick this project up myself.
Yeah, and it's funny that we're tackling this interview now when there's another crazy entry that I first discovered in its manga form and now is getting an anime, and that is Red Ranger in Another World. Which
Yes.
is exactly what it sounds like, and it is played, I won't say it's played serious, but it's played completely as you would expect, and I love it for that.
Yeah, I have a real fondness for that style. I know some obviously there's some people who just avoid the genre like the plague, or there's others who'll be like, oh, if you're going to watch it, you need to watch one or two of like the good prestige ones. And the prestige ones aren't the ones that I really go for. I do really go for the ones that like appear run of the mill on the surface, but play their premise straight, know what they're about, and can do fun things with it.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people dismiss it as power fantasy or Mary Sue-ness. But this has always been the question that's in the back of my mind, and maybe this has been brought up by you at some point as well. Let's consider the premise of a lot of them. Somebody given a second chance by some sort of goddess in this other world that they're supposed to save. If you take away the whole reincarnation part, and they just happen to be this person who shows up in this fantasy world, how would that be any different from, say, Conan or John Carter?
Yeah, it's obviously rooted in the same kind of storytelling thematics. It is a second chance. It's about being, either displeased or just uninspired with the current state of affairs.
Oh, the whole second chance thing. That's basically the setup of films like The Crow, and everybody loves The Crow, to the point where the whole universe was trying to conspire to not get that remake made.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that, like, the idea of what if a regular person went to a fantasy world, like, what if I was in a fantasy world? Like, that's a fundamentally cool idea. You can't let anyone take that from you.
And You know, I brought up John Carter earlier. That particular series has always been kind of wishy-washy about how he got to Mars. Uh, and
Yeah, it has.
it's either barely acknowledged, just one day he woke up and he was on Mars. Sometimes I think there was a comic version back in the day that tried to imply astral projection or something, but none of the explanations have stuck. And the answer is, who cares? He's on Mars. And because Mars has lower gravity, he is Superman was one of the things that John Carter would inspire, because able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Yes.
Yeah, Golden
Yeah, of
Superman,
course.
because the whole thing with John Carter was because his ridiculous abilities were due to the fact that he was on a planet with lower gravity. So being used to Earth gravity, he's doing stuff that seems superhuman. Now obviously, if somebody wanted to take the science of that would fall apart. But that's why you have to keep the realism card on a very short leash.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I have a feeling that the whole idea of a summoning scroll, so that anyone who has it that could summon a hero, was your way of getting around the soul power fantasy kind of thing. Since in a lot of isekai, there's not multiple people being summoned; there's one person.
Yeah, that's right. I think, the further into the genre we see where all of the core ideas have been mined and a lot of people are stretching out, it's becoming a lot more common for multiple people to be summoned, or for, an entire classroom of people, or 100 people will be brought over. And I wasn't inspired by any specific ones of those, but yeah, it was very much a question to me of what's my justification for having multiple protagonists in this world, because everyone does get to be their own protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ended up being the pitch of the game is, it's kind of a game where instead of just setting up the genre is kind of the first hoop to get people past, and then the second hoop is, okay, here is the actual background to what's going on here, which, if you're not familiar with it, the concept is that they brought over a special hero who became the sage and the most powerful wizard that existed, and he defeated the evil crypt lord. And he did bring peace to the realms. And then he decided that he wanted to just go on vacation and be done with all of this. And so he used his special gift, which allows him to copy people's magic and turn it into a scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, hey, this huge, incredible spell that you summoned me here with, why don't I just copy that? Let me human photocopy of this. I'm going to make 300 of these. Anyone can have one. I'll give them to the kingdoms, take good care of them. If there are any problems, just use one of those. And then he leaves, not really expecting that what's going to happen next is that he's pretty much brought a nuclear arms race to this world.
Mm-hmm.
All of the kingdoms want these scrolls. The scrolls are being used for nefarious purposes behind the scenes. They're being stolen. They're being trafficked. There are wars being waged to try and get control of these.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as a kingdom, the number of scrolls you have is pretty much the amount of power you have, because that's the amount of ultra powerful heroes you can bring up for if you need them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's set 10 years on from this initial thing where there are just, there can be up to 3,000 heroes. There's not, because they're not all being used all the time, but hundreds and hundreds of people have been brought in and are now just causing chaos everywhere.
Yeah. Especially since each one of those heroes that's summoned is given some kind of blessing by this goddess.
Yeah, that's right. And kind of the two inspirations for that, all of the gifts in the game either are drawn from the premises of different anime or manga, or there's a lot of them that are also just, I started going into speedrunning techniques, leaning into the video gaming element and going for things that speedrunners do, like you being able to clip into the environment, or hack the games in other way to do all kinds of things.
Yeah. And that certainly fits, because this is definitely a very genre savvy kind of game. Uh, and one of the things that I do remember pointing out, and you had stated that this was something you had in the original, but it sounds like in this this re-release, this almost director's cut that you're doing, is going to be taken out, and that is needing to find a trainer when it comes to your classes.
Yes, the latest version 2 of the rules is something I released a couple of weeks before launching the Definitive Edition campaign, and yes, it included some changes that were overdue and needed to be made, and yeah, one of those was bringing in treatises, is what I've called them. So I've sort of video gamified the way that you do classes in this as well. All the characters in this, they have one of 6 archetypes, which describes kind of what kind of hero you are. Like hero is just an archetype, demon lord is an archetype, bystander, someone who was just hit by a truck and has just randomly ended up here, that's an archetype. And then under all of these archetypes there is a class system, and classes are all quite short. There's only like 5 abilities attached to each class. So it's quite light compared to what you'd see in a lot of other games, but it is kind of made for chopping and changing and trying to level up individual abilities to suit whatever kind of build you've got and whatever gift that you happen to get.
Yeah. Though even with all of that, from gifts to classes, it seems that you're operating on that rule of 3 of might, mastery, and mischief, kind of your own version of the golden triangle.
Yeah, that is a core Lumen thing, like taking things back down to just 3 attributes. The alliteration is kind of a trend in the Lumen games as well, so I wanted to stick with that. And it was a good challenge for me because the way each class is made up of is you've got the basic abilities, which you just get, and then there is one that is associated with each attribute. So everyone has a might ability, everyone has a mastery ability, and everyone has a mischief ability. And whichever score you have the highest of is the one that you start with. But you can unlock a bunch of them later on. And it was kind of a challenge for me to go through and kind of make one of those for each character. Because you're like, oh yeah, this will structure it really well, and then you're like there hours later going, what is a mischief knight? Like, what is a mischief knight?
If somebody asks me the mischief knight thing, for whatever reason, I immediately think of like Serpico in Berserk, who definitely fills the role of a knight, but has a very trickster attitude. The fact that he seems to do the fox expression quite a bit certainly doesn't help.
So it was a bit tricky, but it was also a constraint that got me to be more creative about it. And some of those weirder abilities, like for that exact example, the knight one, I can tell you off the top of my head, that is checkmate.
Yeah.
Which is one where you pretty much pincer an enemy, and you can force them into either having to deal with you or having to deal with the other player. And kind of going with the chess analogy and the way that knights work in the game.
Yeah. And when it comes to the archetypes, since you mentioned a lot of them were drawing upon various anime, I'd like to do a bit of a word association with you. I'll list off one of the archetypes, and I'm not using the ones in the extra materials, even though as far as I'm aware, those things are going to be integrated into this definitive edition. But I'm gonna.
They will, but there's no extra archetypes, only extra classes.
All right. So I'll give you a name of one of the archetypes, and you tell me the first character in a given anime, manga, video game, what have you that comes to mind with that one. All right.
Oh shit! Okay, I'm being tested. Okay.
Think of this as the geekiest Rorschach test you will ever take. This week. I'm leaving the door open in case somebody does something worse. Starting with the hero.
The hero, shield hero. Unfortunately, bad example, but not a good show. But it's the first one that comes to mind. Hero is hero. Yeah,
it fits. Oh,
next one.
Yeah, the Demon Lord.
The Demon Lord is a realist. I was thinking about that one a lot when making that class.
Yeah. I have a feeling some people have also brought up Ainz from Overlord.
Yes, absolutely.
The tragedy.
The tragedy was a little trickier. Not many of those have been adapted into anime because they tend to have a lot darker, more violent themes. I can't remember the name of it, but there is a really good one about a guy who is summoned by the Holy Church of this world, and he discovers through the course of working with them that they are just on like a very murderous crusade. They are a huge problem for everyone, and it is all about them sort of turning on him and the way that they're actually planning to strip his powers away to make their crusade more powerful.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I was thinking of.
Yeah. The reincarnated.
In the most recent version, I made this. I gave it a vending machine logo because Reborn is a vending machine. It's a dumb one I was stuck on. But Reborn is a sword. The slime, spider.
Yeah.
There are quite a few of these big ones.
Mm-hmm. And of the myth.
Myth, Shaman King is a good, clear example of the myth. Another one, the manga Yakuza Reincarnation, which is about someone who is like brought into the other world, like the spirit of a mafia boss in them.
I think when I did the Valley of the Judge, I brought up OG era Yu-Gi-Oh with the myth.
Yeah, Yami Yugi is definitely a fun fit there.
And the last one, of course, would be the bystander.
Yes, Bystander has a lot of good ones. I think the Wrong Way to Be a Healer is a good recent version of that, where a guy gets brought alongside the two heroes that were actually supposed to be summoned, and he's just a weird third extra, and they're like, alright, I guess you get to be their healer then?
Yeah. And when it comes to the way you handled classes, with them being composed of, a starting weapon, a couple basic abilities, and then one ability based on the golden triangle, was a good chunk of that done in a way so that you could have multiple people playing the same class and still have a different kit.
Yeah, very much so. I've found there's actually a tendency. People really like the Demon Lord archetype, and I'll often hear stories about people who've brought multiple Demon Lords into their party or made a nearly all Demon Lord party.
Yeah,
kind of unlocking classes. Originally, it was like, oh, you've got an archetype you can pick from these three classes, and I did have to adjust it a little, saying, okay, these are my suggested options. But don't let that stop you from talking to the GM, because you can absolutely chop and change.
Which is a smart move, because inevitably people are going to homebrew, especially with how easy it is to make new classes. And
yeah,
having people stick to that same set, eventually that's going to run its course if people end up playing enough. In the same way that people playing certain more litigious games end up feeling like they are just playing the same characters after a certain point.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of you were tapped onto this as well, kind of the structure of this is it's a game where most people play this as a one-shot. There are people that make campaigns of this, but much more often it is just being played as a one-off that you pull out of your friends. And like, here's a fun thing, it's got a bunch of options. And so it's kind of got to have that flexibility. You are assuming that your players are probably going to play this maybe a couple of times, but they're going to make a different character each time.
Yeah. I think the only
so you really don't want it to get old.
I think the only thing I'd probably end up adding if I'm running it myself is making the class choice completely random and see what they end up with.
Okay. See, the trouble there is you end up with the reincarnated classes. They're kind of a little different to everyone else. So you've kind of got to justify why exactly the Demon Lord happens to be a living weapon, a sword.
Well, counterpoint, Stormbringer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The myth classes are the other ones that are kind of a bit more closely tied to their thing. Like the saber is built to assume that you have like a legendary weapon, or the phantasm, the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure inspired class does assume that the legendary spirit that's in you is actually like manifesting as like a big person behind you.
Yeah, and I can certainly get that. I'm not saying that the randomization is perfect. I'd probably end up having like a chart for each of the archetypes instead, just so that it's still random, but not full force random in that sense.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and listen, the spirit of the game does encourage randomness. I always encourage people to do gifts randomly.
oh yeah.
Yeah, kind of when I was designing this game, obviously I was inspired by the Lumen games that were coming out at the time and the way that they were using design. But also, like, I wanted to give it like a JTRPG feel and sort of bring some Japanese design influence as well as having Japanese culture influence. And so I was actually going through a lot of the works of Ryo Kamiya, who is a designer whose work I really love.
Oh, I love Ryo Kamiya. One of the early reviews I did on this channel was a review of Maid.
Yes, yeah.
Which
I love Maid, and you would probably see the design parallels there. The way the gifts are created is the same way that all the maids get their special power.
Yeah, and I remember calling out one of Kadokawa's Twitter accounts because as promotion for an actual play that involved the cast of Trash Taste, a podcast I don't watch. They tried to make some remark about how the Konosuba TTRPG was the first Japanese tabletop to get translated into English. And I'm like,
oh, that's not true.
No. Maid came out in 2008. So I ended up referencing I probably was a little bit harsh, but I ended up referencing that infamous clip from OG Transformers of Megatron saying, "You're either lying or you're stupid."
But yeah, no, Maid was definitely an influence. I think Necronica was an early one of his that I read.
Yeah,
and, that's hey, the whole structure of archetypes and classes is the same as poses and classes work in Necronica.
Yeah, and something that I appreciated is that even though you have spellcasting in it, spellcasting doesn't dominate the book. There's a bit of a bad habit among fantasy designers to have just this absurdly long spell list.
Yes, I have bulked out the magic system a little more, especially since you've last reviewed it, but it is still very much freeform. Largely what that's looked at is just adding a whole bunch more tome tags and kinds of tomes you can have, and then just adding like suggestion spells. But really it is up to you to try and just tie that thematically to whatever you've got going on. It's certainly not very numbers based in the way that the magic system works.
Mm-hmm. And a big, like I did a bit of an experiment years ago where I looked at certain books and how many pages of spells they had versus the total page count. Pathfinder was the biggest offender.
Yep, I can imagine that.
I haven't redone it for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I have a feeling because of the way feats work in that game, it's not going to be as much of a problem, but it is still going to be a problem. But I think what's like, I may have mentioned this. I've mentioned this in a few streams, but what even more adds to understanding the source material with that is, and you probably noticed this, that hard line between martial and magic that you see in a lot of fantasy games in the West, or just fantasy period in the West, is not really a thing. Like, the concept of the Gish is not an uncommon thing. I've used Orphan as an example, which is one of my favorite anime. You've got somebody who can blast as well as throw hands if need be. That's not uncommon. And if I have to use a more
Yeah,
recent
yeah.
example, I could bring up every wizard in like fairy tale.
Yeah, of course.
And because I think it's because of the fact that casting is just from a tome, which means it'd be easy for anyone to potentially gish. And you've probably seen a few people do it, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of these shows play with that sort of stuff. I mean, the wrong way to be a healer, which is one that I was just discussing before. The part of the premise of that is the way that he starts using healing magic is to repair his body after like long, grueling workout sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of an ability he uses to like mend his own muscles at a rate where he can get buff super quickly, and he ends up as like overpowered physically through his magic abilities.
Oh yeah, and I'd like to talk a bit about the 3 expansions that are going to be integrated into the definitive edition. So,
Yes.
since I got into this kind of thing late, which one was the first one? Was it the Goddesses expansion?
Yeah, that was Goddesses. So that was the one where I brought Etten on as a guest writer. He's now working as the layout designer for this, but he's made Hardwired Island, Breakfast Cult, games which I really like, and also have a sort of strong anime influence to them. And the idea there was to build out some more of the deities in this setting, and just create a bunch of plot hooks and everything that are attached to that, and just give launching points for people to jump in and start making stuff for their game.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And
Dungeon Tower is the one that came after that.
Yep.
That was working with some podcasters that I quite like, the Anime Sickos, and that was a much more enemy-based book. I was just like, can you just come up with a bunch of bosses for me that might be in a tower? And they made me a huge list of concepts, and then I got to like build those out and flesh them out mechanically, and that was very fun to do because they've got some very goofy, silly ideas. One of the ones I like the most, Gold Saxon, the Financial, who is he's a finance lich, and he has a bunch of like chained adventurers that he drags around with him who are forced to like work for him and like do number calculations. And part of the way that you weaken his powers is that you can try and convince his adventurers to like go on their phone instead of doing work.
Yeah. And of course, the most recent one, I think this was done last year, I think, was Season of the Sage.
Yeah, and that was the one where I wanted to actually have a packaged module, like something out of the box that you can just run with your group. And also wanted to revisit Yu Muto, the first adventurer to come, and he's very much left as a quiet mystery throughout the core book and in later parts. And so I just wanted to set out like at least my thoughts on what happened to him, what he's doing, and how he ties back into the story.
Yeah, and I believe within that you had also put in a few new classes. I know one of them was Magus. I don't recall what the other three were.
Yes, Sage. They're all built around his original party that he adventured with. Because you do end up meeting all of them. Yeah, it's the Magus, the Servant, because he's got a maid-themed adventurer that he travels with, and then the Champion is the last one, because it's a former general of the Crypt Lord. Is his other adventurer.
Yeah, so kind of dipping into the reformed villain kind of archetype.
Yes, absolutely.
The Vegeta, if you will.
Yeah.
Hopefully not with all the other habits that Vegeta has, but that's another story.
Yeah, but it's also a more broad thing of you can become the champion of any god or any demigod in this world, and that's kind of the class structure for doing that. And those 4 classes are quite a bit more powerful, and more powerful again than what are already pretty powerful classes in the core book. So I still have gated those ones a little, but they're fun ones.
Yeah, I can certainly get that. And with that in mind, I know you talked about weaning out the whole trainer thing that we mentioned during the Valley of the Judge, but were there any other things early on that you had considered putting in, but as playtesting went on, you had decided that's not quite fitting?
Yeah, it ended up being a lot of tweaking. I will say, like, doing the Lumen design, I wanted to mention a couple things that had inspired me on the mechanics side. I was reading other games that were coming out in the early stages as well. In Extremis, I don't know if you've come across that one. It is a Lumen game that is based off the Locked Tomb books, so like Gideon the Ninth and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that really helped me is that all of the classes in that are necromancers, but they are differently themed necromancers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was very useful for trying to figure out abilities that were close to one another but still had that distinct feel to them. And then Chosen Ones is the other game that I was reading through and took a lot of inspiration for. That's a post-apocalyptic fantasy RPG, and it's probably one of the Lumen games that has more detail on like weapons and weapon tags.
Yeah.
And I definitely got more out of that from it. And I think I was planning to do a lot more with weapons. I definitely had to strip back. I think in my first drafts I overcomplicated them. And you'll notice this game's kind of unique in that weapons do vary comparatively. Like, a short sword does 1 damage. If you shoot an arrow at someone, that's 2 damage. It is quite low numbers. And what I ended up doing is like scaling in and cropping like the scale of numbers in the game. You have 8 health, you have 6 special points. This never goes up at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get better as a character, what you're actually doing is you're getting faster and faster at recovering that health and recovering that SP from winning battles, because winning battles gets you these drops that replenish you, and it's about creating an engine that sustains you in combat rather than turning you into a big health sponge that can take however many hits.
Yeah, I can get that.
Yeah, it was a bit more traditional, I think, in my first drafts, but that ended up working a lot better for the game.
Yeah, I suppose it's a case of weaning out of old habits with certain games that can kind of get their hooks in as far as how you design fantasy. Because I've seen this kind of thing before, where a certain game has some of the old habits of their inspirations. They haven't quite weaned out of them yet, as the new thing develops its own identity. I just found the tag thing amusing because, well, with my own work, I'm doing something similar, and the reason I did it was I didn't want to be Sisyphus pushing up a boulder for all eternity.
Yeah, of course. Kind of one of the secrets of this game is it is a backdoor into just doing Euro fantasy, right? What I've made is a European style fantasy game with knights and wizards and stuff like that, and it's got a bit of an extra framing that sets it aside, but it's kind of let me play in the heartbreaker space a bit, in a way that
I will
that I hadn't before.
I will admit I'm not a fan of the way the term heartbreaker has been kind of flanderized, and in some cases used in a defeatist manner. I've seen plenty of games where somebody's like, "Oh, that's just a fantasy heartbreaker," and it's done in such a dismissive manner at times. Even just being high fantasy, and for what it's worth, I haven't looked at too many heroes as strictly European high fantasy, but more of what I call Gestalt fantasy, which is the term I use for a lot of console RPGs and games that are in that direction, because it's not strictly speaking trying to be fantasy Europe. It's trying to be a bunch of things in a mix.
Yeah, I know that's actually something that like annoys people about the isekai genre, right? They're like, it's always just the most bland kitchen sink fantasy setting. It's like often not a lot of thought's been put into it, and you just kind of got to rattle people and say like that's the point, and you can actually have a lot of fun with that kind of thing.
Well, something like this is not really concerned about a particular. I know you have a setting and you have a bit of a primer on that, but this is more concerned with a certain vibe rather than a certain defined setting. I'm pretty sure if you wanted to, you could write like a 20-page thing on that kind of thing, though.
Yeah, and in the definitive edition, one of like my very top thing that you can contribute to is the Kingdom Lord backer level, which some people have gone in on already, which does let you write in a kingdom and help flesh out the setting a bit. So that book is now going to, as long as it funds, it will have a setting section, and it will, mostly be like aggregated ideas from other people that, as long as they're tweaked sufficiently, they will all work because anything is on the cards in this world.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I said it's going for a vibe. I've criticized the likes of the world's most litigious role-playing game for playing both sides of that whole setting not setting kind of thing, because whether you're going for a defined setting or going for a vibe or going for agnostic, you got to pick one.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
You got to pick a lane. You can't drive in the middle of the road without getting pulled over. Now, with that in mind, when it comes to the definitive edition, is that primer going to be the same amount of length when it comes to the kingdom, or do you think you're going to be expanding that a little bit more?
The length of it is really going to be set by how many people backing at that level. It will be a surprise to me as well.
Which is fair, but I don't see you.
I think at this point, like it's an A5 softback. It's going to come in at about 150 pages. Is kind of the estimate that might stretch up to 200 depending on how crazy things get. But largely, what's padding that out is like extra stuff that other people are coming in and creating, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Now, with that in mind, putting aside some of the Kingdom Lord backers, what would you be shooting for as far as the page count for this?
Yeah, between 150 to 200, I reckon it'll probably land in the middle there somewhere, maybe the 170 mark. It is a game where all the classes are one page, right? It's got a lot of classes, but they're all a one-page experience. It is a game where all of the expansions themselves are in the 20 to 30 page range, and you've noticed yourself that the core book is quite condensed. Yeah, this isn't going to be a big tome that I'm creating here. At its heart, it still needs to remain a game that is good for one-shots that you can just pull out in a break while you're playing another campaign, or because you want to introduce someone to maybe who hasn't played tabletop games that much, but likes this kind of anime. You can be like, hey, you would enjoy jumping in on this kind of thing. Because even if you don't understand tabletop roleplay conventions, and a lot of people don't quite know how to act, you're like, how these kinds of characters act. This is your in.
Yeah, and I've for the longest time I've been trying to show people that role playing in tabletop is not as daunting or esoteric as some people think it is. It's really quite simple. How everybody pretends to be somebody on the internet anyways. What's the difference? They're already a fan of certain shows, games, what have you, so half the work is already done. But with that said, it's funny that you brought up Made, because with this definitive edition, that's the vibe I get, since the core rules for Made make up about a quarter of that book. The rest is just expansions and
it's just here's some shit you might like to use.
Yeah.
Here's just a written out actual play of us playing the game. Just stuff like that.
Replays are always going to be a thing in Japan, and a lot of those things in the Japanese version of Maid were separate books. They were just combined into the Maid book, so that the actual release wasn't like a 20-page zine. Which nowadays you could get away with doing that as a 20-page zine, but in 2008, probably not.
Yeah, at the time, people were like value for money, and value means page count.
Which is why you have some. I have to wonder if that's the reason you have some of those games in the 90s that had those absurdly long skill lists, like everything Fantasy Games Unlimited did.
Yeah.
Or Phoenix Command, which has been my whipping boy for most of my life.
Yeah, very fairly.
But with that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple. And
yeah, no, very much appreciated. Yes. Thank you for having me. Love the work you do here. I've been watching a lot of your interviews. I just think it's great that a thing like this exists, and that there are now all of these records of all of these creators talking about their work that you can dip into and lean into for inspiration or find new stuff. It's cool stuff.
Yeah. And anytime you see fit to return, whether for more of Too Many Heroes or whatever else comes down the pipe, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged. And of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
Joy, 上洛が上長